I love our discussions as always, because something I had always believed was that everyone shares these core values, these spiritual truths, and I at one time was a person who rejected religious whatever because I just didn't think we did. A long time ago sought out you in a sense and whatnot, to be able to find someone who's like-minded in a lot of ways, right? And even though we may disagree on this next piece and whatnot, but we actually agree so much just based on what you said, of being able to align with God, to be able to find clarity. And see, again, this goes into the very geekness of me, right? That as I look at physics, the beauty of physics, of how it works, the harmony of movement, and so there is no doubt for me that, again, that comes from God, that God wants us to be able to sit and understand this moment, this very world, this very universe it has created for us. And in that, as we get into something of why I can't deny the scientific method, not all science, but the scientific method of testing and verifying for oneself, there is where that scripture actually tells me to begin to look at the Bible differently than the dogmatic way I was indoctrinated into it, of being told that the earth is only 6,000 years old. Within the scientific method of looking at the earth touched by God, not by man, again, the Grand Canyon, the millions of years that exist within layer of layer of layer, for me is undeniable. As how do you explain ocean and then desert, that they lay on top of each other, right? That there was a desert and there was an ocean and then there was a rainforest, and you can see all this within the layers, to see how the universe works. And so once I get to a point where understanding that God is just harmonious, and so gravity, physics, light, biology, all these things line up to show how they're all one thing, right? How light works and whatever. I can't go back in time and say light worked a different way. It's always worked the same way in the sense of what we understand time-wise. Same thing with physics. Same thing with that. This is just how the universe works. And so I can never accept something that tells me that the universe did not work this way, that at this one time it was different for people for some strange reason. I see no evidence of that, and really no reason for physics to have changed, for the earth to have been different at one time, in the sense to say that it was completely covered in water, when we have no evidence of that. So when we get into these things that go outside the bonds of common sense, outside the bonds of testable theory, fact, then I have to step back. I have to step away from things that say Noah's flood, right? When there is no real proof for that. But there's all kinds of proof for how the Spirit works, how we can take responsibility for the life that we have. And again, having the free will to choose love or fear. What happens when we choose love? What happens when we choose fear? That's all testable. Everything Christ talks about in the sense of his gospels is all testable within your life, to see if you can apply that love in that way. But again, as we need to get into the historical accuracy of things, then those things in that same testable way, they don't shake out to me. And I don't think that it's necessary for them to. I said a lot.
Well, yeah, but I want to touch on a couple of things. One is, because you don't understand it today, or because the within the body of evidence that you have today, you cannot validate something, does that make it invalid? Or does it make it to the point where you may not have the full body of evidence in order to correctly or accurately arrive at that? And I'll use your same example of physics. Over time, as man gained knowledge, they began to gain understanding because they began to expand on their level of understanding, their body of knowledge. So could that also be a reflection or perspective taken on some of the principles outlined in the Bible? Just like you talk about the flood of Noah, or the earth covered with water. You know, the fact that you pointed out that there's layers of the earth that defines a progression. So maybe the fact that as the Bible described the earth being covered with water, maybe as we begin to learn more through history, we would then find the evidence that supports that premise.
Well, there is a need to still seek more evidence, and then there is an acceptance of the evidence that these are the things that happened in said amount of time. And because we've dug in the earth, we've done these different things, what else could we be looking for? Right? Again, if the earth was covered in one major deluge for a period of time, then there would be this layer, this mud layer, all over the earth that we could just dig down. And according to what a lot of Christian teachings are saying, you're just talking 6,000 years, you're probably only talking about 2,000 to 3,000 years when you're talking about the time of Noah. And so as we dig in the earth from just 3,000 years ago, there is no mud layer.
There's no mud layer that we, based on our
limited understanding?
No, I won't say limited understanding, but our just as you talk about man documenting the Bible, we also talk about man documenting science. So in effect, in man's documenting science, their principles, their discoveries, their stories must align. So maybe in the sense that the evidence that exists is currently misunderstood or misinterpreted.
Well, it's unfair to make a parallel out of something that's not a parallel.
What do you mean?
Scientific documentation is not the documentation of a story. It's the documentation of the process to find out what it was that they found out. So I can't walk in here and say, this happened. Write it down. Well, it don't make it fact.
Right, I agree.
What makes it fact is me being able to show you how it happened, how it could happen, why it happened, and having the evidence so that you can go back and prove it for yourself. That's science. The Bible is a set of stories to help us get a moral understanding from my perspective. And so let's take Noah's Ark and look at the evidence that I've gathered, right? And so I had to say, okay, well, Noah's Ark. Well, when did this happen? Right? And so we go back and say, it had to happen about 2,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. Well, let me take that back because it's 2,000 years now. And so it would have had to happen like 3,000 to
4,000 years ago. Yeah.
And so we go back 4,000 years ago and we look to see what happened. There's all these people who were living. There's these civilizations that existed. These civilizations existed before and after said time. They go back 1,000 years before said time and exist 1,000 years after said time. You can say Egypt, Mesopotamia, Hittite, Assyria, so on and so forth. All their writings and stuff, their existence, it's there in the ground, dug up. We have it. And so I have to say, okay, well, these people weren't wiped out by this great flood if this happened at this time. What else is there? And so as you get into the the writings of these people, you find, oh, wait a minute. These people, these Babylonians, wrote this other book 1,000 years before that 4,000-year timeline. And they talk about the flood, the boats being made in the same way, 2 by 2 going on, whatever. It's the Epic of Gilgamesh there, talking about this very same story. And you're like, whoa, And then you find out the people who wrote the Noah story had never written down anything. They'd always spoken oral traditions until they were exiled into Babylon, the place that wrote the Epic of Gilgamesh. And then they write down their story, and it's eerily similar to the one of the people that they've been exiled with. And so, based on that evidence, I have to ask, could these people be human and create or embellish their story, as opposed to be something other than what every other human has been, and document this true story that they've told for hundreds of years, word of mouth, and then wrote down and have it correct, word by word? One is, has a very slim statistical chance of being, and the other is common sense. You must hold.
Is the story? Are you saying the story is not true?
I'm saying
because, and the reason I'm asking that is because what I heard you say is the story was told by 2 different people, maybe 2 different time periods. So is the story not true, or is the story
okay?
Yeah, explain that to me.
What you heard me say again was, we take the Bible. There is a story in the Bible, Noah's Ark. That's a historical story. Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And so I, for me, had to go back and test that fact. Is this a historical story? And so where we have to start is, okay, well, when did it happen? Okay. And how did it affect the people of that region? Right. And so we go back to when, and we can go back to those people. We don't see, when we go to when and we go to those people, we don't see that happened historically. And so when we then look at those,
it happened at the time. At the time we are indicating
that it didn't.
Okay, go ahead. Continue.
We have to, again, if it's historical, then we have to look at history, what we found from history. Because if we even go back and say, okay, well, it didn't happen at this time, then we could go back 10,000 years. We still have history that we can go back to. But again, what most Christians believe is that it happened probably around 4,000 years ago. And because of that, we can go back and look at all those people who lived 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years ago, and see that their cultures weren't wiped out. Now, am I saying that it did not happen? For me, there is no proof to say that it happened. For me, the evidence shows that these people, like all other people who wrote down things like King Arthur's Court and so on and so forth, embellished their history. Did not document their true history, they embellished it. Which, again, from time immemorial, who has not written their own myth, told their own stories. But again, for us to give these people, give just these people this great, I don't even know what to say, but you'd have to give these one people just this great respect for doing something that no other people, no other individuals on this earth have ever been able to do, which is tell a story word of mouth for hundreds of years and then go and write it down correctly word for word.
Again, that's where you and I see it different. In that I believe that if the story is God's story, it can be documented accurately from word to mouth to mouth, and indeed at some time on paper. So that's where we have a difference.
Okay, but show me the evidence. And see, here is where when we're saying science, scientific method, show me the evidence of where that has occurred. Outside of just these special chosen people. Again, for me, it as an African American, it ego-wise, it infuriates me that we stand up white supremacy. And we stand up white supremacy in a way of being able to say that there is just these one people who can do this special thing that nobody else can do. When we're all brothers and sisters, equal under the eyes of God.
You know that what you just said is really funny and interesting, because you ascribe to a people the embellishment of their history, yet you support the Egyptian version as not embellished. Or am I misunderstanding? Because again, the issue here is I don't see a white supremacist perspective in the scriptures.
Well,
okay,
well,
and I'm not questioning. We had this discussion.
Can we go back to that though? To what you said about Egyptians embellishing.
Yeah.
Their. Do I believe Egyptians embellish their story? Yes.
Okay.
We call it myth. We call we call it non-literal. That's what an embellishment is. It's not meant to be taken as the Egyptians didn't expect you to walk around and see a man with an alligator on, as you know, with a head. That was the embellishment. That was the myth, right? And so they created things that were outside of reality to show you that they were embellishing what it was that they were saying. So yes, this is my point, that all people do it. You're saying just these people did not.
Well, I'm not saying, you see, again, I'm not ascribing the Bible to these people. I do not believe that the Bible is a Jewish creation. I do not believe the Bible is a white man's creation. I do not believe
that it tells the historical truth of the first people.
I think it tells the historical truth of mankind on earth. Yes,
that's
from A to Z, and whether that first man was black or brown is irrelevant. Whether
we're not speaking race, because I don't believe in race, right? But again, for me,
well, you just talked about white supremacy.
To separate out a people as chosen, to separate them out as something special, as something different than other, is the foundation of white supremacy.
Well, then,
these people died. The people within the Jewish understanding, and so on and so forth, the Torah, the blah, 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 that civilization died.
Right.
Their butts were kicked. They weren't successful.
Why? Because they didn't follow Christ.
Well,
I mean, that's the moral of the story. They were not following.
They didn't believe in Christ and whatnot. I mean, but God still espoused to them special treatment and so on and so forth, because He believed that they were better than what they were. He was wrong.
I don't. I want to step back from this concept where a race or specific group of people were anointed as special. Okay, I want to go to the principle that within a world that existed under Satan's control, God clearly identified some individuals that He wanted to show to the world what His principles were, what His truth were in terms of getting rid of all the myths and all of the distortions that were created through the influence of Satan. So in doing so,
He creates his own myth.
He didn't create his own myth. He established a reality within the mythical nonsense that was going on at the time.
As we step back, you say you want to remove this special treatment of these people, then I don't get how we can do that when Exodus tells of their special treatment.
Well, there were laws and there's guidance that, in fact, if you think about the concept of the Exodus, it was removing them from the world and then changing the standard in which they live that was not in harmony with the world they came out of. And in effect, the Bible talks about, don't practice these things you learned that were you experienced in Egypt, because they were not aligned with the principle that God was teaching. And in effect, yeah, you're right. The Exodus was, and when it comes to Leviticus and all that, it was a matter of changing the dynamics or changing the principles by which these people live.
And so that's a good spiritual teaching.
That was the intent.
That's a good spiritual teaching, but in it being a historical story, again, there is no evidence of. The Egyptians don't talk about it. The other people who lived in the area don't talk about it. There is no artifacts within the desert of where they, so on and so forth. There, and so the issue that we have, again, as it being a great spiritual story, we lose that spiritual teaching from the very beginning of what we were talking about in this conversation of how people get lost. Is that instead of focusing on not doing this and not doing that, worshiping idols and so on and so forth, then it gets into if these things actually happened or if they didn't happen, and what does that mean for the Egyptian people, and what does that mean for the Jewish people, and did God just come and intervene in the lives of just these people? And then we'd have to ask, why would God come and intervene in the lives of just these people and nobody else? And nobody else. For me, that's just not true. God, in the sense, intervenes in everyone's life who asks for it. Once they choose to do, through love, through positivity, through whatever, then they get their blessing. When they choose to do disharmony, negativity, and so forth, my point of that is that has always been. And someone being shown that happens in the sense of, if I continue to just eat donuts willy-nilly, just eat donuts, then there's going to be some negative consequences to that, with diabetes, heart attack, cholesterol issues, all these different things from me doing this. Now, if I stop eating those donuts, more balanced, and all that stuff goes away. That has always been. That is the show and proof of God's perfect universe, perfect harmony that I need. To have to go back and say, well, if I do these special, principles and things like this and that, then I'll receive my blessing. There's how people get lost, in my humble opinion.
Well,
excuse me.
In effect, I don't see a lot of difference in what you've said. and I'll use this analogy. Someone is in a world where everybody eats donuts. Okay, everybody eats donuts everywhere. That's all he knows. That's all he knows. Mm-hmm. So everybody around him is behaving this way, behaving the way. So the standard of which he identifies his life, all this diabetes and stuff, is part of that community. It's part of those people. So that person now needs a point of reference that says, okay, to your point, what do people look like that don't eat donuts all the time? What do people look like that apply different principles in their life? So someone within that community starts a little group and they stop eating donuts. And they provide the example for that community as to what the effect of not eating donuts are. So people look at it, people appreciate it, and people then make a choice of whether or not they want to pursue that. And it comes from that facts, that evidence, now something that they can reference, as opposed to being lost in the misunderstanding, being lost in a way of life that is normal, because it's the way of life that all they know. Now, to your point, it doesn't mean that this understanding doesn't exist internally and that there isn't a struggle. The question, as I've heard it said, is the part of you that's going to survive, or the part of you that's going to be dominant, is the part you feed, is the one you give knowledge to, is the one you build up on. So unless you have a different perspective, unless you have a different point of reference, you can get lost in the misunderstanding and stuck in the misunderstanding. And again, I believe in the principle of the story is that within the world lost in all of these misunderstanding and these teachings, Jehovah God put within that world a example, a people, whether black, white, brown, it's irrelevant, a set of people that then begin to demonstrate, or their objective is to demonstrate, apply the principles. Now, did they do it perfectly? No.
Did they do it?
Yes, they did. There's evidence that they've done it, they didn't. And the question, to your point, did this story affect all people? Absolutely, because it was about showing the example. Did Egyptians leave, according to the Bible, did Egyptians leave Egypt along with the Jews? Yes.
Did Egyptians leave?
Yes, did non-Jews that were part of the Egyptian culture and community, were they part of the exodus that left Egypt?
Yes, okay. in the Bible.
Right. So there's a lot of effect on other people other than just the Jews.
Well.
And you said, yeah, go ahead.
I would say that according to the story that there would be, that the story says that there was an effect on other people. According to the story, there's a lot of things that are insinuated in the sense of saying all these people ate donuts, when within life, within the reality, everybody don't eat donuts. Everybody don't think the same. People do have their own perspectives. And for me, again, what's the beautiful thing about God's universe, the same way we can look out at the stars to glean understanding of our own star, of our own planet, of our own solar system, is the same thing we do with people. We can look at the diverse group of people out there, as people don't act blindly within groups. They may put on the show that they do, but who they are and who they want to be internally at home is something different. And there's always this great drive to be who God made you to be. There's a drive for teachers to tamp that down and make people believe that everyone thinks the same and can think and be the very same. There's teachers and leaders and Nazis and whatnot who try and stop the fact that we are all diverse. We are all different.
But we cannot all act similarly?
Acting similar is different than acting same.
Well, let's talk about the principle of love that we talk a lot about. Explain that to me in the context of what you've just said. How can, in terms of, can we all apply the principle of love in our lives and
have people think differently,
and it be different?
Well, how love would be applied in that would be your understanding that we are all different, and now your acceptance.
So we have different interpretation of love.
Well, I believe that we may have different interpretations of love. As I've always said, my belief about love is simple acceptance. Do I accept the world that I have been granted, or do I reject it? My rejection is not love. My acceptance is love. And so, do I reject your beliefs and now reject you? Or do I accept that you just have different beliefs and thou shalt accept you, still honor you as me. That's love to me.
And the question then, it goes back as you talk about. Let's take the scope of the Christian or community, as we talked about, as we started this discussion. Why is it then that within even the Christian community, we have this lack of love and or to your point, acceptance?
Because, well, again, I'm not part of it, and so it's hard for me to say that this is why they do it. But people aren't taught acceptance; they're taught dogma for love. That love is these things, that doing these things, and so as we go back to Judaism, in the sense to say, well, love is following these laws. Love is going to this temple. Love is demonstrating all these different things, as opposed to just accepting what is. Again, it's about control, and why Constantine set it up to where they would include the laws that were clearly said were no longer needed by Christ. They were included in a sense because history shows that monotheism was created in a sense to control people through God, instead of it being something set out to free people to God.
What?
As what we talked about, the history of monotheism, Akhenaten comes along to say, there's only one God. Get through that God, you go through me. What we're talking about here within what Christ is trying to break down for the Pharisees, or break down to the people against the Pharisees, is that here again we have these people, these Jewish teachers and whatever, that's saying, oh, there's only one God and you have to go through them to get to him, and thereby they control you. Constantine comes along and says there's only one book, there's only one Christianity, believe it or die. And here we are today with that same Bible created by Constantine, historically again showing that monotheism was created in a sense more to control people than it was to free spirits. Well, Christianity, I'll say, has this special relationship in that it was written in the Greek, written separate from the Torah. And as it being written in the Greek, it was based off of philosophy of pagans that were trying to say that you reach God from here. You go inside to get God. That God is not something that's just outside of you, that God is something inside of you. And so mystery, the mysticism of things, would tell you to go inside yourself. And as these Jews who were trained in Greek ways wrote down a New Testament or Gospels based on the philosophy or the teachings of the Greek world that they lived in. That's what makes the Gospels so beautiful, so separate in a sense from the Old Testament, in my view of things. So hopefully that gives you a bit of understanding of what I mean by monotheism. Historically, for me, the evidence shows that it was created to control people, not free their spirits.
Well, I like to explore that topic a little further in the future, because I don't think monotheism was anything created by man. I think monotheism was the original principle outlined in the Bible. There's one God, and this plurality of God was introduced through history of man, to your point where the Egyptians started to use the creation to explain the creator. They started to venerate the creation to quantify the creator. So I truly believe that monotheism is not an invention of man to, as you just said, to control, but it was actually the original principle outlined by Jehovah God.
I hear what you think.
I hear what you think as well. And again, our elements,
evidence for what it is that you're espousing to say. So show me the civilization that first starts with monotheism.
I will do that in our next discussion, because there is evidence. Now, you're and we'll talk about that. I want to end on this note, because we got to wrap up in a few minutes. But I want to end on this note, and we're talking about love and your interpretation of love,
Yes,
and my interpretation of love, and others' interpretation of love. I just want to read the scriptural interpretation of love, the definition of love that helped me to move away from what I feel, what I believe, and also which allows me to look beyond your definition of love being acceptance. Okay? And it says love is long-suffering and kind. Love is not jealous. It does not brag. Does not get puffed up. Does not behave indecently. Does not look for its own interests. Does not become provoked. Does not keep account of the injury. It does not rejoice over unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth. Bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. And he goes on to say love never fails. So love, as I describe this, goes way beyond acceptance. Okay?
there's nothing. There is absolutely nothing in what you just read that did not equate to acceptance, because as you said, what it gives you, acceptance gives you all those things. Show me where, where it says love doesn't this and that. Show me where acceptance does not fit, because it fit in everything you said. So I agree with what you just read. Right? Acceptance never fails. If I accept what's in front of me, it won't fail me. And in the sense of, that's how I know how to get around what's in front of me. If it's something that is bad for me, in a sense, it's for me to accept it for what it is in order to know how to deal with it.